Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining in live for today's webinar, Grocery Shopping Habits, Understanding the New Quarantine Routine. If you have any questions, please submit them in the chat and we will address them at the end of the presentation. Today we have Drew Breunig, EVP of Strategy here at PlaceIQ, joining us from the Bay Area. He will be diving into the data on grocery habits and trends that we've seen over the last couple of months during social distancing here at PlaceIQ. So without further ado, welcome, Drew.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Rita. So we've been tracking the current shelter-in-place ecosystem for going on 2 months now. We've been sending out and sharing our insights both with our clients via custom analyses and our weekly newsletter. If you aren't subscribing to that, I encourage you to take a look. What we're going to walk through today are some of our core learnings about the new grocery shopping consumer. Traffic hasn't just shifted downwards, though it's starting to shift back up, but traffic has become remarkably different from what it used to look like beforehand. So, quick little stop to talk about PlaceIQ, who we are and what we do. So the data you're about to see is analysis derived from the movements of over 200 million unique devices. We see the pings emerging from those devices, those latitude and longitude pings, and they kind of stream into our system. It's a pretty dumb data set at that point, and what we do is we identify when visits are taking place, when we believe a device is slowing and and is actually visiting a place within notices because that tells us exactly what building shapes look like, where businesses are, and where residences are. And we've been doing this over our entire raison d'etre is to understand the consumer journey by taking these little blips and turning them in meaning. I'm going to turn off my webcam because it just gave me a little warning that I have a band, which is very odd, but we'll keep going. So back and zoom out and look at the phases of our post-COVID life and try to find the patterns. So here, what we're looking at is we're looking at foot traffic to a handful of categories that we see as representative. So big box retail, which is like Walmart and Target, grocery, pharmacies, malls, which we use as a proxy for basically non-essential retail, fast food, airports, offices, and transit stations, so public transit stations. And the x-axis or the y-axis here is a percentage. And so all of the figures here is foot traffic compared to the average foot traffic that was occurring pre-COVID. So we took a 6-week period ending in February, and we compared it to the traffic that we see on a daily basis nationally. And we can see percentage differences. So entering March, traffic was a little up. This is normal due to kind of the spring break cycle. And then we hit our first phase of COVID, which we'll break down in a second, which was called panic and prepare. That's kind of what we've christened it. This is when things just went haywire. There was no daily, weekly rhythm. Everybody was checking the news, trying to figure out, what the hell was going on. And visitation behavior just went sideways. It ceased to follow rhythm. Some things spiked, but they all hit their lows following the end of this roughly 10 to 11 day period. Once panic and prepare ended, we entered what we call the quarantine. And the routine is because the Monday, the weekday routine, that rhythm, see that little curve? That repeating pattern is the behavioral pattern that governs all of our lives. During normal time, we go through the same habits week in and week out. Most growth is done on the weekend, more time to take your trips. Work days and coffee visitations and gym visitations are done for a week. And then evening, we see our visitation to casual restaurants and other entertainment activities. And what was really scary, at least from our perspective during the Panic and Prepare, is that that normal rhythm broke down. Normally, the time rhythm days, you see some an abnormality doesn't last that long. We saw it last for 11 days, and it took 11 days from kind of our initial shock, which was on about 3/12 or 3/11. I remember 3/11 because of that San Francisco alternative 90s rock band. It's catchy, mnemonic, copyrighted. And we see that little weekly routine returns. We started to see that routine return. Traffic was down, but we were seeing behavior solidify. And we saw two tiers of behavior. We kind of saw the essential business behavior, or things people are comfortable going to, which we'll get into more in a sec. So fast food, pharmacy, big box and grocery. And then we saw kind of everything else. There were kind of various tiers in between. You know, casual dining comes down around about the 60% mark. But really there's kind of two strata in everything that exists between. So it's worth revisiting how Panic and Prepare went. What were the major events that drove everybody inwards? And the reason it's worth mentioning is because what was really interesting here, so I'm in the Bay Area, and our community here was the first people to issue shelter-at-home orders. And what's interesting about that is the shelter-at-home orders really only hit at the end of the Panic and Prepare phase. People, though, started to go out, get their essential items, stock up, overbuy toilet paper, and then retreat into their households starting about 3/15 without government orders. We just kind of shut down on our own. And instead of bureaucratic cues, we saw cultural cues. So everything became real for everyone. When the NBA suspended its season, and we kind of learned that Tom and Rita Hanks were ill. Our American royalty suddenly had been stricken with the disease. Offices were some of the first places to react. Anyone who could announce work from home policies jumped ahead of official orders and started to figure out what that looked like. There was a brief spike in airport traffic as people made it home from their spring breaks. The stock-up venues like pharmacies, big box, and groceries spiked before going back down. And then everything just kind of settled. And traffic to big box grocery, really everything hit their lows, with the exception of, you know, airports, which kind of, and offices, which took a long curve to kind of bleed out. But the takeaway here is that cultural cues were what drove everyone in, and everyone went in as a nation. Even though, you know, the Bay Area got a lot of press for sheltering first, and then New York a week later, you know, the behavior was seen throughout the nation. And that's a really important thing to note, because when we start talking about reopening, it's the flip side of that coin. But as we saw here, you know, traffic to grocery, at least here at this time, in mid-April, and you'll see some updated numbers in a bit, was down about 20 to 30%. And it wasn't just down, it was different. The way people were shopping were much different. The first way that shopping was significantly different is that grocery shopping now occurred equally throughout the day. With less schedule constraints, visitors were more evenly distributed. So you didn't have to have a commute. You didn't have to drop your kids off at school. You didn't have to stay in the office. If you had a spare hour and a half, you'll hit the grocery store. In fact, I did that this morning. Before this webinar, I had some time while the kids were out taking their morning walk, and I went and took advantage. And we see lots of people doing that. So these orange bars, these red-orange bars, are what our pre-COVID visitation to Trader Joe's, we just use Trader Joe's as a proxy, looked like by hour. And you can see it kind of looks like a bell curve, but it's a skewed bell curve. It skews towards, on a weekday, Monday through Friday, towards the 3, 4, and 5 p.m. time periods, the kind of rush hour. And as many of you know, that's largely because of commute and rush hour traffic, or after school. Hey, I need to pick up a few things to get dinner on the table tonight. Let me hit that as I go on my way home. Without that constraint for work, we looked at the week of March 30th, for this analysis. And we see a ton of early morning movement. People starting to go way early because they have less constraints. And anecdotally, especially in March, there was, people were talking about this is the time you could grab toilet paper or whatever the kind of currently impacted product was. After toilet paper, it was paper towels. Then after that, it was hair dye, and eggs were a hot commodity for about 3 weeks. So a lot of people skewed to the morning, and this pattern has remained. The other thing that's interesting too is we don't see this gradual close. We see an abrupt close because Trader Joe's specifically is closing at 8 o'clock to clean the store and restock the store. And so we see a lot of kind of adjustments in behavior where people are still learning the new routine. They might get there, realize it's closing soon, and so you see this abrupt drop off, not a smooth drop off. And we've been following that, and that still has become true. So with less schedule constraints, visits are more evenly distributed, which kind of plays with your day parts a bit when you're starting to think about this. And by the way, this is what weekend traffic generally looks like, spread throughout the day. So Mondays through Friday now really look like Saturdays, and I think a lot of us can identify with that. So visits are also more distributed throughout the week. So here is the visit counts to various categories. Grocery and coffee is at the top. Pharmacy is this lighter yellow line down here. We have dealerships here, but we'll just kind of ignore that for a second. Fast casual dining and casual dining. As I said, this is the weekly routine that kind of governed our lives perhaps before. Grocery shopping started to take off Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and then it would kind of hit its low, Wednesday of that week. It was a very regular routine. Casual dining would peak on Friday and Saturday and Sunday as people went out, then fall to its new lows as it started to return. As we move to the shelter-in-place foot traffic routine, I've kept the y-axis the same here so you can see the comparison. Not only is traffic lower, but that weekend spike is gone. You still have that Friday and Saturday spike that's kind of there, but it's a much lower percentage. Before we had a range of about 275 to upwards of 350. So we're ranging over 100,000 points. And here we're going from essentially a low of 225 to a little over 250. So much tighter range. So in the same way that traffic has been flattened throughout the day, traffic has been flattened throughout the week. This is flattened significantly without the constraints of commutes or, again, lots more opportunity to go to the store, even though in general, people are trying to avoid it. And we'll see that in a second. Right here. So to show you, even though people are spreading their visits out and there's more opportunity to go to the store, they could go Thursday if they wanted to. They could go first thing in the morning. People are visiting less, or they were. We're starting to see visitation frequency rates cap back up. The tricky thing about visitation is you have to have a longer slice of, or visitation frequency is you have to have a longer slice of time because you want to see frequency over, say, a month. So for this analysis, we actually looked at Seattle because it had been one of the first communities impacted significantly by COVID. So we had the most data to deal with. And what we could see is that visitation frequency to Kroger, Safeway, and Sprouts, all of the grocery stores that we analyzed here, with one exception, which I'll talk about in a second, dropped significantly, about 13 to 14%. Compare that with visits to Walmart, Target, which again were more of a monthly visitation thing. They remained unchanged. Pharmacy was down a little, Costco was down a little, but in general, grocery was down. And we've verified this with our friends at IRI who have been releasing similar reports who show that basket sizes have increased significantly. So people take fewer trips. They take them throughout the week, they take them throughout the day, and they buy lots of different things when they go there. Big basket trips, the kind of run-in, mission trip and just grab two things is verging on extinct in this era, though we do see it starting to come back. One thing that's interesting to note here is Whole Foods. So Whole Foods is the only store here where it actually increased in frequency. It went from about 1.25 for visitation frequency, just a little bit, up 4%. And you wonder why that is when everything else is going the different direction. We've actually zoomed in on that and done a deeper analysis there across different communities. And the conclusion that we've come to is something that you could anecdotally notice if depending on what Whole Foods you were shopping at in different communities, is most of the traffic at Whole Foods are basically shoppers for hire. So delivery shoppers who get delivery orders, buy a bunch of things, go drop them off, then come back and do it again that same day. So those guys are making up so much more of the share of Whole Food shoppers because that is the way that works with the kind of gig working delivery service. We actually see an increase of frequency because more of the people there are effectively employees compared with more of the people here being shoppers. So an interesting dynamic that we see taking place, and we do see Whole Foods relying more on this type of employment. So recap is one of people are going less often. Part of that is because they are buying more and stocking up more and cooking more. The other reason they are is because grocery shopping is kind of a pain. It's a stressful scenario for many people. Many people are super worried about forgetting something or not remembering. If you're someone who is very in a high-risk community or interact with people who are in a high-risk community, you kind of loathe to go out of the house into a public nerve-wracking environment. Tensions are high, but not only that, more time is being spent. The trip actually takes longer than it did pre-COVID. Part of that reason is because you're buying more things. We know that for a fact. So you're walking every aisle in the store. The other reason is the lines out front. So the metered lines out front. Again, we can see Trader Joe's being the biggest impact here. People who are shopping at Trader Joe's are spending 30% more time. They're going from a 20-minute trip to a 26, 27-minute trip. A significant impact as we start to go in. So people are spending longer, and across the board, we're seeing plus 10, plus 11%. Like these are not small differences. And the other thing is people are staying really close to home. So what this chart is showing is how far the median visit from a device's household they're going to visit various places. So how far are they traveling to visit auto dealerships, casual restaurants, coffee shops, fast food, whatever it is. In general, everything has shrunk. People are staying closer to home. Now, some categories are impacted way more than others. Casual restaurants, coffee shops, and fast food categories have been slammed in this regard. People are driving much less, 26% less, 16% less. And part of the reason for this is that the commute has been eliminated. There's no workplace to go into. And if there's no workplace to go into, there's no office lunch to be had. So fast casual is actually, and coffee shops are struggling because a lot of these places, they may be situated among a mixed zoning area, so they can invest there and do well. But if they're located near offices, they're really impacted because people just aren't there. Now, when it comes to grocery stores, big box, pharmacies, fast food, what I call kind of the core four of essential businesses, very little change. But what I want to point out here is that basically for everything, if you ignore auto dealerships, this chart is in kilometers because we work in metric in most of our analytics functions. 5 kilometers is about 3 miles. Everything that people are doing is basically within 3 miles of their house. They just aren't leaving. They're staying incredibly close, which is great because it limits the potential for community spread. But it does change kind of the opportunity for people to be exposed to businesses outside of that 3 meters. That has a really interesting impact on grocery because a lot of the things that they aren't going further than 5 kilometers for, grocery I think has an opportunity to start to replace, either with pre-made meals or other things that kind of fulfill those goals for the things they're no longer doing or no longer willing to travel to. The other thing that we're seeing as we see is that these changes in behavior are impacting other categories. So as we said, we know people are stocking up. We know people are cooking more at home. And these are having impacts on kind of the symbiotic relationship, or kind of there's a sympathetic relationship between these retailers and dining. So not only is dining traffic down, though it's coming up, as we'll see in a second, it's significantly down, and one of the reasons is not just because of shelter-in-place restrictions, but also because people are just cooking more at home and kind of staying in for the long haul, and we see that taking place. So we actually looked at how many days people used to wait after a grocery store visit to visiting a restaurant. And we see it upticking. These seem like small numbers when you look at them in absolute value. It's important to remember that they're median. But previously, if you went to a grocery store, you would generally wait 3 days before heading to a restaurant. And again, these numbers are national, so you can imagine this looks different in New York or San Francisco. Nowadays, we see that number up 20%, which is not a small amount. You're now looking at 3.5 days before waiting before you visit a restaurant following going to the grocery store. And for big box, we see that trend as well. And it used to be 4.5 days, and now it's 5. Big box being Costco, Walmart, Target, etc. As I said, one of the things that is super interesting about Whole Foods, I swear we could do a entire discussion just on Whole Foods. It's kind of this weird outlier, even though it is grocery and luxury grocery in many ways. It also is different from kind of an operational perspective that makes it very weird. So as you saw before, the core 4 of essential businesses are grocery, big box, pharmacy, and fast food. Roughly in that order. Fast food is climbing above pharmacy right now, and I anticipate to see that continue to go up. Whole Foods is struggling in terms of some of its traffic, foot traffic specifically, because its function was as much a grocery store as a fast casual restaurant. So if you looked at hourly traffic patterns to Whole Foods compared to a Safeway during the weekday, Whole Foods had a giant bump in the middle of the day that no other grocery store really had because of their lunch offering. Their lunch bar was a major draw, especially for workplaces, and that is effectively gone. And while there is still food and delivery or pickup, it's like no one wants to go hit a salad bar during these times. So traffic is down significantly, and not only that, the traffic that is there is often that delivery segment. So delivery is good. Transitioning some of their business to delivery, if they can keep up with that capacity, is very strong. Anecdotally, I still hear people having a very hard time trying to book orders on that. But what it does mean for, if you are a CPG selling within Whole Foods, is you need to kind of have a much longer lead up and consideration time to make it into that digital cart. Suddenly your job looks more like an e-commerce play consideration, whereas there's no opportunity for happy accidents, end cap displays, or any sort of merchandising that may occur within the store, because most of the people just aren't going to the store. It's a lot of delivery and external shopping. Now that's true that it varies, but it does mean that there's just a lot less surface area to play a part within Whole Foods, and we see that playing on. So this is a 7-day moving average, so it takes out the humps, and you can kind of see how various things fell. We can see the spike during Easter, and then a little bit of a downward turn, but that actually reverses as we go forward. So that's kind of the kind of grocery shopping as a whole. But I want to share some of the macro trends that are affecting what we are seeing as reemergence. And I want to, that word's really important, and I'll talk about that in a second. But to recap, grocery shoppers are visiting less often, but it's becoming a little more often. They're starting to return back to their normal rates. They're spending more time there. They're buying bigger carts. They are traveling much less. They are replacing restaurant meals with home cooking. They are shopping throughout the day. They are shopping throughout the week. And they are definitely planning ahead, and we are seeing that, and we are seeing the impact of delivery, order, and pickup. So it makes for a very interesting acquisition model. So people are trying out new stores to see what is the best situation for their that fits their quarantine preferences. But it also presents a challenging merchandising environment. If you are a merchandiser or CPG selling inside of these stores, it's going to be tricky because you kind of get less shots on goal. You're going to have to, basically try to engage with these people significantly ahead of time, so you make it on that list. You have to be part of that list because if you're waiting to close the deal when people get in store, that's just going to be a really tough sell. So now let's talk about the macro trends, especially reemergence, which is the big trend going on right now. As I pointed out, everyone sheltered in place nationally. As a nation, we retreated and sheltered into place. But regionally, we're reemerging on different schedules. Now, before we go a little further, I want to also, that's kind of one of my sound bites, but the other sound bites that I think is really important that we are seeing here at PlaceIQ is there is a big difference between reopening and reemergence. Reopening is a bureaucratic decision to open or allow stores to open. Reemergence is a community or a household or a person's desire to go out and actually visit that store. And it can vary based on the person, the community, or local environment. It can vary based on the category. To give you a couple examples of that is one of the things that I'll cheat ahead is let's look at the reemergence, this is a national chart, of fast food dining. Again, this dashed line is our February norms, our pre-COVID norms. And this green line is what fast food dining looked like. It took a drop, and this green line is a 7-day moving average. It took a drop. At the end of the panic and prepare, it snapped back up as people realized these places were still open. And QSR has actually functioned, in my eyes, as a relief valve. It's a pressure relief valve. I'm super tired of being at home. I need a break from the kids, or I need to do something with them. I don't want to cook tonight. I don't want to do dishes anymore. I just want to get out and do something. Fast food has become a safe thing for people to do. It's one of the few options available that is easy, it's an affordable luxury, and there's very, very low risk. People have been eating, and we see this because it's been steadily, very slowly climbing. This is when people are testing the waters, and nothing bad happened. And by the way, real quick side note, there's a lot of other location companies that are doing a pet peeve of mine, which is they are using visitation data like this to say whether or not regions are good or bad at socially distancing. And this data cannot show that, because while it shows how many people are visiting a fast food restaurant, it does not say whether they got out of their car. It does not say if they stayed 6 feet apart. It does not say if they wore a mask or not. We have seen fast food continue this rise in communities that have seen massive declines in infection rates, Seattle specifically. So Seattle, we've seen a lot more people increasing their shopping, increasing their fast food visits. It's more visits, but because that community is social distancing properly while visiting increasingly, it doesn't mean more visits equals bad social distancing. I see those two terms being confused, and as someone who works in this field and cares about it a lot, I really just makes me upset because it's people trying to get headlines for representing something that they are not in fact measuring. And we can see this, and we know that it hasn't had a huge impact because fast food has been kind of on the rebound since Easter. And we, this is national figures, but if you look at New York, you can see the same thing. If you look at San Francisco, if you look at Seattle, or Los Angeles, we can see these rates climb back up, and they've been doing so for weeks, well beyond the incubation period. And again, I'm not saying that this data, it works both ways. It can't tell you that people are social distancing properly, or it can't tell you that they are doing it improperly. It is kind of agnostic in that regard. It just tells you whether people are visiting. And we can see this climb back up. So back to fast food being a pressure relief valve. Is it something that people are now comfortable doing because people have been doing it, and they are now fine with it? It's very good. Now, if you compare that with grocery and big box, we can see grocery and big box climbing back up as well. This is reemergence. This is people being okay and starting to come back and do business at the rate that they were doing before. Reopening hasn't impacted these businesses because they were already still open. And people are starting to get comfortable with these kind of reemergence. But there are other things that people, even if we haven't seen a spike in visits to barbershops in Georgia because people still just aren't ready to go back yet, even though they are reopened. So it's really important when you are designing business plans and business strategies that you deal with reemergence, which is actual visitation, and reopening, which is kind of legislative opening, as different things. Sometimes they travel together, sometimes reemergence precedes, sometimes reemergence follows, but you need to keep those in mind as you start to go. So for essential businesses, we are seeing reemergence before reopening. So they have been steadily climbing back to their zero line. And right now, they're only about 10% down from their pre-COVID norms, big box and grocery. Fast food is 10 to 5% down from its pre-COVID norm. Fast casual has been quite the gainer here and has been really encouraging to see because they faced a tough road due to the absence of commuting, and I'm really happy to see them as businesses start to adapt. Casual dining, this is the one case, as I said, sometimes they align up, sometimes they don't. That spike right there, that is an actual, you can see a little bit of a bend, in a significant bend in that 7-day average. That is because dining rooms opened. And in some communities, casual dining rooms opened, and you did see an increase in visitations as people kind of rushed back. But again, remember, it's still down below 50% nationally, even though we do see it breaking that 60% barrier for the first time since, I would say March 18th. So really significant move there. So traffic to grocery stores, though, remember I said because it's an essential business and because it's kind of governed by that routine, and that's like the one thing we can do. What I'm looking at here is I'm looking at all the different metropolitan areas, actually the top 50 DMAs, so market areas. And we are plotting them on a line. The only ones that are colored are the top and bottom market areas. What's interesting here is that there's a couple outliers. So New York and Hartford are down, 50, 55%, which is no surprise. These are some of the communities that have been most impacted in total. They are starting to recover, but it is slow going. Whereas most of the rest of the U.S. has kind of stayed together, like they're traveling together. And when they go slightly up, they're going slightly up together. But compare this to fast food. As I said, fast food is a pressure relief valve, and pressure is different. Reemergence is happening locally. So this national decline, but regional reopening. In some markets, Wichita, Little Rock, Tulsa, fast food was above its pre-COVID levels. Even while it's hovering, down 40 to 30%. In kind of Detroit, San Francisco, Miami, and New York, places who had early shelter-in-home areas. And this is really important. Is Panic and Prepare was kicked off not bureaucratic orders, but by one big cultural cue: the NBA shutting down and Tom Hanks becoming sick. As we start to emerge out of a quarantine routine into our next phase, which is kind of the reemergence phase, we aren't traveling together. And that's because there's different impacts at different counties and different states. The cultural mores are different. The perceived risk, so if you have high infections or not high infections, the compliance with social distancing, which affects the other two, the economic local economic significance. Hey, do I need to go out and work, or do I have other options? All of these things impact these greatly. And so you are now seeing, instead of one big factor driving everybody back in, very complex market by market analysis that makes business planning tricky, because now you can't even treat all of California the same way. It is different even if you move from Los Angeles to San Diego, San Francisco, and in here somewhere is Sacramento and Bakersfield, which are completely different. So knowing kind of how reemergence is happening at these market or county levels is really important. To show this, again, we can take a look at essential and non-essential businesses amongst urban and rural areas. And we can see that, hey, even within the same state, we're just looking at Texas, visitation patterns within urban and rural areas are quite different. To essential businesses, they are almost identical. But when you look at all out-of-home visitation, which accounts for things like parks and gardens, other businesses, just any out-of-home activity, we can see rural communities are much more likely to go out and test the re-emergent waters. They're much hungrier to re-emerge compared to urban counterparts. And with grocery, though, this is not as big of an impact. We see grocery behavior to urban and rural chasing each other pretty evenly, though we do see rural start to tick down a little bit in the last couple of weeks. Part of that, I suspect, is because dining is ticking back up in these areas, and we can see that in some of the numbers here, where fast casual is actually, nowhere near as impacted in rural communities as urban communities. And the other thing that is important is, even from the brand level, the recovery is very different because of the regionality of these different things. So Spring Market is a chain in Texas and Alabama that is doing great compared to year over year, partially because it expanded its number of locations, which is one of the reasons foot traffic is up. But in some of the ones that didn't expand over in these areas, these regional players are doing okay versus year over year, compared to some of the more national representative or places that are in areas that were much more impacted. So at the brand level, you see so much variation because grocery is such a regional business. And for urban and rural communities, the distance traveled is the same. We actually had heard anecdotally that the COVID kind of marked the return of the local, grocer, especially because people aren't going to travel far to go to a Walmart. And that's not true. We saw that reported, and that was kind of a meme that was going around in various articles, that the local grocer was becoming way more important because people didn't want to go, and that just was not the case. People were going to their same grocer regardless of if they're urban or rural. Here, this chart is showing the change in distance traveled to various areas. It's best illustrated by looking at hotels. Hotels are still open, people still visit them, but it's almost all local traffic. It's people who are truckers or frontline workers, or it's we've actually heard lots of cases of budget hotels being used as kind of makeshift quarantines among families, or people returning home, and so we see it all kind of getting closer to home. But with big box retail, we see rural traveling even further to make that trip to big box retail, and we see grocery unchanged. So no variation in distance traveling versus urban and rural, which it was an interesting development. So coming up here, one of the things I wanted to make sure we leave you with before we kind of close this out is just kind of recap our learnings so far, and some of the things that we are recommending to clients. We're seeing best practices start to reemerge, or start to emerge around reemergence. So quick little recap of the macro level. You can't schedule, you can schedule reopening, when certain states are going to open reopening, but you have to monitor for reemergence, that increase in visits, people actually venturing outside their home, that desire to leave the home. Different communities, even different individuals, have different appetites for reemerging. And from a product, merchandising, and marketing strategy, you have to account for these. If you know a household is like more hesitant to visit a grocery store, you should be talking about, your cleaning processes. Amazon or Whole Foods had a great message for this, which is they're going to be handing out masks at the door, which I think is the best way to enforce mask compliance, rather than say, hey, you can't come in without a mask. You offer people a mask. That's a great a way to do it. And the good thing is that's a great marketing message for people who are more hesitant, who are not ready to reemerge. Whereas people who are fully emergent, you're going to talk about price and selection and assortment and offers to get people back in the store. As I said, while we sheltered in place as a nation, we're reemerging as regions. And the reason for that is cultural cues drove us inward, but our reemergence is governed by local influences, including economic realities, cultural mores, reopening orders, infection rate, and perceived risk. So you could go out there, and in fact, we have many very large consultant clients who are trying to build models, taking into account all of these things and predict what's going to happen next. We prefer to just monitor the traffic locally. There's about a 4-day delay, but it is very good at basically saying, hey, we're starting to see reemergence here. We're going to closely follow it by sector, by brand, and by region. We see that as just like, we can build a model, but the thing is we've never seen this behavior before. We're in uncharted territory. So even if we build a model, we have very little window to tune it, which is why we're preferring to basically look for monitoring reemergence on the local level. And I think if you have some information that helps you achieve that, you're doing better than everybody else. So don't just watch for official orders, take the temperature on the ground. We're providing data sets to help people do this. They're year-over-year data sets. Here's movie theaters, here's bowling alleys. We did see an uptick in bowling alleys recently as they started to open as orders expired. And just red, yellow, green categorization, make this super simple down to the county level and down to the brand level. We just feed them out and people can make decisions on this. Super simple things to inform your entire business, which is, hey, here's a data feed. It arrives weekly and it tells you where reemergence is occurring for your brand and for your competitive brands and for your sector. For media and merchandising, this type of intelligence can be used for targeting. So we can build audiences of the regions that are staying inside, even though orders may be lifted or not. We can build audiences for the regions that are just starting to test out, and then we can build emergent regions. Marketing to grocery and sheltered and testing region is great because you have very little competition. In emergent regions, you're going to be competing with all the other things people can do, all of the other, restaurants, dining, all the things that they are going out and doing, and we see them doing. How do you continue to fit in that story and help them build the habits? If they've been trialing at your store, how are you keeping them sticky and getting them back in? I think is a really big important thing, and treating these regions as differently from an audience and marketing perspective is pretty significant. But like I said, this can also vary by individual or household. We're actually starting to look at visitation associated with households to understand kind of residential areas that are sheltering, like basically just no visits are occurring or very, very few visits are occurring, and most of the time they're just staying home. That's a great person to push to online ordering, to push to drop off in car, to push to e-commerce solutions. If you're a CPG, that's a good time to go direct to consumer. If people are starting to venture out, that's when you're going to start talking about, hey, we're handing out masks at the door. Hey, we're wiping out carts. Let's tell you all the different ways we're trying to make this, less, safer for you and less scary. And then finally, the reemergent. Now you're talking to people who are looking for an excuse to go out. How can you facilitate that in a productive and safe way? Talking about, daily routines. This is where mission trips start to become a thing again. So, in closing, as we start to take a look at this, and I know we've got about 10 minutes left, but I always like to wrap these up at about 45 minutes, give you guys some time back to regroup, or even you can plug some questions into the chat. I'll be hanging out here for another 5 at least. If questions keep coming in, I'll hang out till the end of the hour. But again, having intelligence at a local level is going to be crucial. We know that the mood is going to be different on different local levels. We know that reemergence sometimes precedes reopening, sometimes is driven by reopening, and sometimes follows reopening. And we know that grocery changes, shopping changes have changed significantly, which impacts your ability to, as I like to say, have as many shots on goal with consumers, because going to the grocery is a stressed, prolonged, and less frequent thing that is happening, even though we are seeing some signs of recovery in terms of visits to that space. So having the data to understand that and planning kind of as locally as your operations allow, and informing that with data in a way that doesn't, overwhelm your operations is going to be crucial. So thank you for joining me. This means a lot, you guys spending some time with me during this time, and getting some virtual socialization or entertainment that I hope you guys have found informative. If you want to plug a chat in the chat room, you can send it. Otherwise, you can also email me at drew@placeiq.com, which is on the screen right now. If nothing else, I'll just hang out waiting. But again, thank you so much for joining.
Thanks, Drew. Great stuff. It looks like we do have a couple of questions. Again, if anybody has any more, go ahead and send those over. So jumping back to kind of our early morning analysis, someone has asked if we looked at senior citizen shopping.
Yes. So we've started to. When we did this analysis, it was actually before most of the senior citizen analysis had picked up. So forgive me for a little bit of the early graph. I've been working our analytic team rather hard on a bunch of new studies that are coming out. So we haven't had a chance to update this. But yes, we do see traction for senior citizen protection hours. And we see it that it is driven differently by brand. But different things are being taken advantage of. The tricky part is that it's not consistent, though it's starting to be enforced consistently. So in California, you're starting to see, mandated hours for at-risk communities. But yes, in those analyses, we do see a spike in that early morning hour where traffic is a little higher, and we do see that spike continue into the next hour as people arrive and realize, hey, it's sort of senior hours, I'm going to have to wait 15 or 30 minutes. So it does help spread that out, and we do see those promotions working. They do, people tend to pick them up, and it does drive additional traffic throughout the day.
Great. Let's see, we have another question here, and I'm not sure if we looked at this. Do we look at gas stations?
We started to. Yeah, what's up with that one?
Do you have insights on traffic around gas stations?
Yes, so we looked at gas stations, and we looked at convenience stores as well, where and sometimes we view those very similar as the same sector. Gas stations in general, traffic is down, which is not surprising. We sometimes even use gas stations as a benchmark, because the more people visit things, the more likely they're using their cars to drive to visit things. The more cars they use to visit things, the more gas they have to consume. Gas station traffic is down because visits are down by about 50%. So we see gas stations following and basically serving as an index for this, and I don't have it here, but it basically looks like this, which is the all out-of-home visitation. So in urban communities, it's down about, down to about 40–50% of traffic. In rural communities, it's about 50 to 60% of what usual traffic is. But again, it's starting to climb back up. It's kind of that interesting index there. It's kind of a demand function generator. The other thing that's interesting from a convenience store perspective, so from the merchandising and people actually going inside and buying the wares inside, we see that as being driven by single person households, so people who don't have a lot of exposure and don't want to be cooking every night for one. We see them visiting C-stores at an increasing share. So like the percentage of convenience store customers pre and post COVID for single families is much higher. So a lot more there. We see it also, the share of people visiting who are blue collar workers, so essential workers who are still frequently, that is going up as well. And we see more visits, a greater share of the visits being made up by lower income as well compared to before. So you still see some traction there. But it's not amongst families who are, strictly sheltering in place, and it is gas station traffic basically is tracking, the visit index as a whole. So it's basically down 30 to 50% depending what region you're looking at.
Mm-hmm. So we do have gas stations. We can and have been looking at them. If you'd
Yep.
like any more information on that, reach out to us. Let's see there. I think that this kind of also explains another question we got around, are we deeming someone as sheltering in place because their device is not moving or just sitting at home? But I think as Drew kind of answered, we've actually created these indexes to see if somebody is actually going anywhere or just going to an essential business, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so the audiences we're building to determine if people are sheltering in place, this still sheltered, is basically looking at visitation activity associated with a device that is associated with a household, and comparing the pre-COVID activity associated with that household to post-COVID. And we're looking at, what is it, 10% of what it was before, or is it 70% of what it was before, and making a call based on it that way. I kind of am watching my language in thinking about how we market it, because again, we can't firmly state whether they're sheltering in place or not, and I don't like to police that. Mm-hmm. I leave that to the epidemiologists and historians. But I think that's the mechanism by what we're looking at, is we're looking at pre-COVID visits compared to current visits, and looking at that as a ratio and starting to segment that out to understand what is the propensity for a household to reemerge.
Great. And then let's see, a couple of questions, new questions just came in. Have we looked at how consumers have consolidated trips and which brands might be winning or losing those consolidated trips?
Yes, so that is definitely something that we have seen. Mm-hmm. What we have seen is that in the beginning, during the Panic and Prepare, there was a lot more assortment shopping. Assortment slightly increased. So we knew that from IRI as well, which is that people were checking different places. I think M4, our friends at M4 who do virtual focus groups, had seen this as well, which is, hey, if there's no toilet paper at Costco, I'm going to check, the Safeway on my way home, even though I don't usually go to that Safeway. Anecdotally as well, we also heard about a lot of people visiting ethnic markets that they had never, considered, because they might have supplies that they'd never had. So there's a lot of sampling early on. As the trips wore on, I think there was consolidation as we saw out. But as you'll note, that consolidation is happening within the categories. It's not happening cross category. So if you look at here, we can see both grocery and big box coming back at roughly the same rate. So we're not seeing one replace the other. So Walmart is not replacing Safeway, and vice versa, if that makes sense.
Great. Okay, well, I think that's about all that we have time for today. But as Drew said, if you have any questions, you can reach out to us at drew@placeiq.com or webinars@placeiq.com, and we will get you your remaining questions answered. And so we had one question for a copy of the presentation. Yes, we can send that over to you as well. So again.
And aren't we recording as well? So if anyone wants to share this internally, I think we can provide that as well.
Yes, we are recording. Thank you. So thank you everyone for joining, and hope to see you next time.
Thanks all. I really appreciate it.